Hello and welcome to this edition of A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and big guest, big roundtable here today for the program. The Reverend Dave Lima is joining us. Got an interesting conversation to happen today, and it's obviously something that pertains around the world, but certainly affects us here locally. Dave, good to have you with us.
It's good to be here, Jim, and thank you for having us here. It is something that we wanted to do. We have worked a long time in this community together. The rabbi, just before we started airing, was mentioning how long he's been here, 27 years. And 27 years, I didn't even realize it had been that long, but I've known him just about that whole amount of time. And of course, our friend Martin Bentz, who will be introducing themselves as well as what their positions are. But we have worked together from our different perspectives of faith, and it's easy to do that when times are good. But when there's a struggle like what's happening in the Middle East, all of a sudden friendships and relationships are not necessarily challenged, but they're different. And being able to talk about the different perspectives that we have and the different feelings that we're going through, and they're very real. And but for me, working with the Interchuch Council, it's always been about trying to bring community together to help both build understanding, but also community service. And I think education is major, and being able to understand one another is major. And that happens only when you are able to talk. And so I want to thank you for hosting us and bringing us here. And again, I'll have them describe more about who they are, but this is Martin Bentz from the Islamic Society of Southeastern Massachusetts, and of course, one of my oldest and dearest friends in the community and in faith, Rabbi Raphael Kanter from Tifereth Israel congregation.
So I want to give you folks, and I want to thank you for coming in, and both coming in. I know that Dave called me up about this to talk about it, and I think it's a great idea. And knowing you as long as I have, and actually knowing you as long as I have without knowing who you were, being somebody who lives 100 yards or 200 yards from me in a different street, but it's great to have you both here, and I appreciate that. I want to give you folks an opportunity to open the show with just in your own words about what you see happening and your hopes that we can talk about here for people to understand what's going on. Martin, I'll start with you.
Okay, well, I'm Martin Bentz. I'm the outreach coordinator for the Islamic Society of Southeastern Mass. I've been here just over 8 years, actually, because I retired from the United Nations and then decided to move here because my family was near here. So, and I found also that there was an operating mosque right nearby in over the line in South Dartmouth. And I enjoyed being able to follow my faith in this area and be with my family. So and we have worked oftentimes with the rabbi and with Pastor Dave in trying to establish greater understanding amongst the faiths. And this I appreciate greatly in both of these gentlemen's approach in how they see that we are all from an Abrahamic tradition. We all turn to the prophet Abraham, peace be with him, who was the founder of the idea of one God. And we have then evolved through our various prophets to deeper understanding of our own faiths. And the important thing is to understand each other's faith. So this is, we've been given many opportunities. We've supported each other. For instance, in the terrible incident with the Tree of Life Synagogue, we came together and supported the Jewish community. The Jewish community and Pastor Lima supported the Muslim community when there was a massacre of Muslims in Christchurch, New Zealand. So we understand the pain and the suffering that each one of us have gone through. And so now, again, we are all implicated in the suffering. We've seen the horrible suffering that's been happening with our Israeli and Jewish friends who were attacked unmercifully by Hamas. And then on the other side, as Muslims, we see the affliction and the retaliation on the citizens of Gaza because of what Hamas has done. And so we are sharing our pain of what each community has gone through. And certainly there's no immediate salve or assuage of the suffering. But as we speak to each other and comfort each other and support each other, we'll begin to find a way, perhaps, to bring some kind of peace and understanding, first of all, amongst ourselves, and eventually maybe we can influence people around the United States and around the world to see what we can do together.
Starts at home, too.
Exactly.
Starts at home. Rabbi?
Yeah, so I want to use the attack as the jumping off point. I would just say that in addition to Jewish Israelis, there were Arab and Druze Israelis who were killed in that attack as well. So I want to make sure that we acknowledge that loss of life as well. What I do think, and part of the reason I wanted to be in conversation is I also see a conflating of Israel and Jews together. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not connected to my Jewish brethren in the state of Israel, but Israel is a sovereign state, and I am a Jew living in the United States, okay? The minute you talk about this being Jews perpetrating this, whether or not they are not, it is not my government in Israel, my government is here. So what I see as a great danger is we see the mounting anti-Semitism, the number of incidents are rising, and that to me is a signal that people are conflating Israel and Jews as the same thing. Now, if they're going to do that, then that's the point where I have to say, call it out as anti-Semitism. If you're not able to nuance issues, then you are going to go off into fantasy. It's either fact or fantasy, and many times with disinformation, we have that as a problem too. With all that said, and being here with my two colleagues, I wanted to also be able to say, and I thought if I could distill down what I wanted to say, it would be that we may approach what's going on in Israel from different moral vantage points, but I would be remiss if we didn't also say that there is hope. Martin talking about peace in the midst of a war is very important to me, okay? Because I feel that we cannot lose hope in the midst of what is a devastating, and I'll just call it what it is, a bloodbath on both sides, and will continue because that's the nature of war. But I wouldn't want to walk away from sitting down and saying we have to look to peace, even as we may have grave differences. We have to continue to look for peace and for hope.
I'm curious, from all your standpoints, when you think about it, you and I were kind of touching upon this before the show. How much does the extremism in your faith, not your faith, but in the faith, I mean, there are those who are religious and abide by whatever your faith is, but there are the extreme of those too. How much are those impacting just religion in general, just the way things are right now? I mean, you see it in Christianity, and it seems to be, you see it in politics, it seems to be everywhere, but those are the people, whoever they are, that seem to be determining the fate for a lot of other people who don't want those things.
Right. Can I jump in for a second? Because I have to go to my extremists, okay? Because this is a topic I'm well aware of in our own community. I can at the same time support the state of Israel in its right to defend its citizens, and at the same time say extremist settlers on the West Bank are the greatest threat to the long-term viability of the State of Israel. So you hear those two things. I am owning the extremism in my own camp, and know the threat that they pose, and know that it is a threat that, God willing, when we come to the end of this war, we're going to have to address, and I think it has not been addressed. I don't think it's been addressed vigorously. I don't think. Now, this should not be understood as I'm criticizing Israel in the midst of a war. I am simply saying that if we're going to have honest conversations, we have to be able to look at the picture in the broadest terms, and also be able to own the parts that will stop us from reaching a peaceful conclusion. And I'm talking beyond this war. This war is in the context of a long history. If we're really looking to solve this problem, we are going to have, I'll speak for my community, but I think it's overall, my greatest threat to me in terms of my own group, conservative Jews, is the extremists who will pull us into directions that the majority don't want to go.
Martin?
Well, similarly in in Islam, there are over 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, and most of them are in Far East Asia, in Indonesia, Malaysia, India, and Pakistan. And too many times people conflate what their peaceful existence is all about with what's going on in the Middle East. And Muslims, as a principle, Islam means peace, to submit to God in peace. So you have this 0.1% of Muslims who feel agitated that they want to express themselves in violent ways. But that is, in fact, going absolutely contrary to the teachings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, who actually said, you shall not harm innocent civilians, non-combatants, particularly women and children, the elderly, anybody who is not actually engaged in attacking you, you should not attack in any way. So those extremists who have actually gone and committed atrocities, and we've had them even here in the United States, as we know, are not following actually the dictates of Islam. We do not recognize these people as representatives of Islam, or even as Muslims, though it's for God to judge who actually becomes a Muslim. You can be considered a Muslim on the Day of Judgment, but they really do not represent the principles of Islam. And yet, too often the media says, oh, look at these people who are perpetrating this atrocity or this violence. They're all Muslims, the Islamic State, which called itself an Islamic State. It was far from being an Islamic State. And it never was really recognized by any of the Muslim countries as a Muslim state. And so we're unfortunately in a situation where people do, as you say, conflate extremism with the representation of a religion.
And proportionally, it's a small amount of people
Very small.
versus the people who actually follow the faith that you're talking about.
Exactly.
And Dave, Christianity is not excluded in this either.
Not excluded, and definitely not innocent. I think, going back to what you originally said, I think we are, especially these days, in a heightened atmosphere of extremism, whether it's our politics, whether it's our relationships, and definitely when it comes to nations and faith. There's been more atrocities, more killing, more destruction done in the name of faith and protecting the faith and preparing the faith. And Christianity has not been innocent in that, in a lot of the different things, and to Martin and the rabbi's point, in our most basic of teachings, the tenets are always about loving each other, caring about each other. Community is major. It's about being able to support the poor and the elderly, the sick, the young, families, and sometimes in the extremist point of view, it destroys all that. It takes away our innocence, if we had innocence. And quite frankly, that's one of the biggest difficulties, and one of, should be our biggest concern is going back to what the rabbi said. All of a sudden, something gets labeled, and we relate everything to that one thing. That Israel means Jews. Jews are here. Jews, anti-Semitism has been on the rise. I've been part of the Holocaust Memorial Committee. I've been working with the synagogue for 20 some odd years, and I've seen just how much,
It's up 60%, I saw in one report.
I saw 330% being reported right now. But it's the same thing for Muslims and Islam. I mean, when you had a president that all of a sudden was going to shut down countries just because there were Muslims from coming in, it gives a rise to everybody saying, yeah, well, if he's thinking that, then there must be, and everybody gets labeled. Everyone gets labeled that way, But there's differences even in opinions and even in thoughts in our own belief systems, I'm part of the Interchuch Council. I've got churches that are very to one side and churches that are very to the other in terms of their beliefs. There's a core belief that we all have.
I was just going to say, though, isn't there, you kind of touched upon it when you were talking about it, and maybe I'm being naive. I probably am. But isn't there a basic foundation that you all share about? You kind of touched upon it. We want to raise our family. We want our beliefs. We want to love thy neighbor and support those. It doesn't, if somebody is if your neighbor's having a problem, it doesn't matter what they believe, we're going to help them. Isn't there that, do you believe that in a sense that most people, whatever denomination they fall under, believe that?
I think at its best, that's what religion and Judaism should be about, right? In terms of respect for others, as Reverend Dave said, addressing the things that religion does well, which is to talk about the poor, to talk about the vulnerable as well. I wanted to make because as I was listening to everyone speak, I did want to underscore that we are living in a time where politics and religion are being merged together.
Yeah. I was going to touch on that.
Yeah. I mean, the abortion issue is the perfect issue in terms of politics and religion coming together, and it's a toxic mix. And I truly believe, though this is not popular, I truly believe that we have to get back to the separation between politics and religion and make it a clear dividing line. I have seen over and over again that the mix is toxic, and by the way, it benefits neither religion nor politics, right? America is a great country. Why? Because it allowed the freedom of religion to flourish. But that was under the guise that politics and religion should be separate. And as an experiment, it's worked very well. Now we need to see it exported to others, and right, everything starts at home. We have to recommit ourselves to that stand. And I do see that as a long-term problem that we have to address here in our own country, and also I think it would behoove other societies to see the value in that as well.
Martin, with your career, this must be something that's you've seen on.
Well, I definitely agree with the rabbi that we should keep the separation of state and religion, because religion is a very personal belief. Mm-hmm. Each person has their own way of approaching their connection to the higher being. In our sense, it's God, it's Allah, whether you express it as that or not. And it's and that's the first commandment for all of our faiths here, is that there is only one God. Thou shalt believe that there's only one God. And that God created all of us. But then within the faith, we have our own ways of approaching our beliefs. And it cannot be conflated with saying that, well, this is a Christian nation. In fact, Jefferson and Madison were extremely careful not to say that it was a Christian nation, because they even considered, can there be Mohammedans as U.S. citizens? They were doing correspondence, and they said, yes, of course we can have Mohammedans and Hindu people of the Hindu faith and the Jewish faith. Their biggest fear at the time of the creation of the United States, and when they wrote the Constitution and the rights, is that we're worried about the Catholics, because the Catholics are going to pledge allegiance to the Pope, and they won't be loyal to the United States. But they said, well, we're going to let it go. It's going to be fine. Catholics are also going to pledge allegiance to the United States. And this is where we have to say that we cannot impose religious values, particular religious values, within our political system. We all have certain moral standards. We say we shall not kill, we shall not steal, we shall not commit adultery, things that we would uphold as and being fair and honest in our trade and transactions. Those are principles that any of the faiths would hold as moral principles that we have sort of encoded into law, just as being a practical way of having a society. You do not cheat each other. You do not steal from each other. You do not harm each other.
So again, the foundation, as you're saying too, is there for all of you. Is that the toughest challenge you face as heads of your respective churches? Do you find that the combination of social media and politics makes your jobs that much more difficult?
Speaking for myself, social media and the overwhelming domination by technology in people's lives, to me, is the greatest threat to the long-term mental health of my congregants as a group. I have seen nothing. I see more and more negative outcomes from social media through the disinformation, misinformation, and outright creation of media through basically using old footage for present day footage, using getting people even to the point of having a politician maybe speaking, and the words that come out of the politician's mouth is nothing that they've said. So we have a danger of this dominating, and then we have the technology taking people away from talking like this across from each other in the same room. By the way, it's hard to be unpleasant to each other when you know each other personally, or at least you strive a lot more. When you are anonymous in the world of the internet, the insidious and viciousness comes out in people as human beings in a way that it could never come out. Even no matter how heated we got in this room, it would never come out the same way.
And I think that's important to recognize. Social media has its joys. My family, my daughter and her family in Maine, I don't get to see them every day or every week like I get to see my other grandkids that live here in New Bedford. They posted a dance they did in church on Sunday, and we were able to enjoy that this morning and talk back and forth and all that. But, I remember when COVID was just starting to come out, I pleaded with my church, do not get your information from social media.
Right.
Don't get, because somebody posts something, and, I get it all the time now, about the war. Well, look, this person's on the ground there. I says, how do you know that person's on the ground there?
Right.
How do you know that person's not in Illinois and trying to make a statement and a point? We all know that, especially with the new AI technology and everything else, there is more false messages that are out there, and it's all because somebody's looking to get their views going. Mm-hmm. And I do want to step back 1 second. The separation of church and state, I understand the concept that everybody wants to say. The thing is you can never separate it, because I am who I am, everybody is who they are. Their faith informs their belief system. But we need to recognize that what makes this country great is the fact we all have our opinion and one vote. Mm-hmm. And my trying to impose my view on you without you coming to understand where I'm coming from, I can't beat it over you. I can't beat it into you. I can't, I can try to express it, but then that's what makes community, have to make a decision together. And that's, again, where we have the extremism that's going on, whether it's our politics or our world. Somebody has made a decision what is right. And we will all follow what is right, or we will beat you figuratively, literally, spiritually. And that's where we end up with the things that we're dealing with today.
Martin?
And to go back to your question and what we're dealing with in the faith, I agree with the social media is sort of indicative of exactly where we are right now in this society. We put so much influence, or importance, I should say, on the individual. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I've got a selfie, this is so important. And they forgot that they're a sense of community, the sense of, first of all, that we are the product of one creator. And so we've lost the worship of God to the worship of the self. And so too much is influenced by someone else's opinions or their own self-importance, rather than being a little humble and saying, okay, let me try and understand my fellow human beings, my neighbor. Let me try and help my neighbor. Let me work with my neighbor and for the betterment of the community, because that is the essence of our faiths, is supporting the community, as the rabbi said, and as you said.
Is this generational, though, do you find? Do you find that?
I think it's been
Been building?
amplified by this generation, because that's what they've been given access to and been taught, and say, oh, you're so important, you're the best thing in the world, you're the only thing that exists.
Right.
And they forget the teachings, or maybe we haven't even taught it, that we have a community, we have our own support systems that we must respect. And that hasn't.
And I think we're paying a price in terms of mental health as a result of exactly what you're describing. Now, you can always say it's about monitoring. We're monitoring more people's mental health. I would still contend that we have a higher level of mental illness challenges as a result of really that large dichotomy that you're talking about.
As someone who works on that in this community, with all the different structures and running the Greater New Bedford Suicide Prevention Coalition, I can tell you that the struggles have amplified over the last couple of years. And a situation like this causes even more escalation.
We're going to run over, and I'm letting Dan know we're going to run over. I have a couple questions I want to ask all of you, because I think it's important. And you and I touched upon it. You and I always talk about this. Just the people who are attending services, religious services, there has been such a drop-off. Do you think that impacts what we're talking about here today, is that people just aren't going or have lost faith?
Well, I think that, to go back to my point, is that they do not see that the community is as important as their own self-interest. And so as a result, there's no interest in reigniting their faith and their being present in our case, the mosque, the masjid as we call it. Though they do feel a certain obligation to come to our Friday prayers. In other words, at least here in our community, we have about 60 or so people who come to the Friday prayers. It's our Sunday service, as you could say.
Mm-hmm.
But
Is it more or less? Can I ask that? From what you've had, is attendance up or down?
it's about the same. It's a little bit more actually recently. But additional services that we have daily services. Very few people feel that it's important to them to attend the daily services.
So do you, and I'll ask you as well, and you as well, so do you, from your position, are you out there talking to those who aren't attending? Do you try to get them to go in? How do you show the importance to them that faith matters?
Well, we try, and we have the weekly sermon by the imam. It's not myself; it's a different person who gives the sermon.
What do they say to you though? Why don't they go?
It's just, I'm fine doing my own thing. I'm just fine. They don't need to have that extra connection. And to me, the extra connection is like recharging. I need it very much. But for them, they say, no, we're okay. I have things I want to do at home. I want to not bother coming into the services.
Yeah, the line I get over and over again is, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious.
Yeah.
But I think there's an untapped yearning for spirituality, because you see these different kinds of smaller communities popping up. The problem is, I don't think they're built on higher level principles, right? CrossFit is not going to save the world from destruction, from destroying itself. And with all due respect, no offense meant to those who do CrossFit. I'm simply pointing out that
you're a whiz at that, aren't you? I know.
I don't do CrossFit. No offense here.
So I was using that just as but my point being, there are other ways to create community that you're looking for higher principles, to bring some kind of solace, some greater sense of the spiritual. Yeah. But this is something that I think we're all trying to address. How do you address the fact that people aren't coming into the formal buildings of religion, and yet there is a yearning out there that's evident to me overall.
And I do think that, especially over the years, there's been an eroding of trust. Especially in the Christian world. You've had scandals and of all kinds of natures, and but people have to recognize that as leaders, we would all tell you, it's not us you follow. It's our Creator. It's as we envision our Creator, and I'll fail. I fail every day, and I try not to, and that's what we're supposed to strive. And there's a scripture in Hebrews that says, "Don't forsake the gathering of together," because we can encourage each other to good works. And to me, that's the definition of community, whether it's in our own houses of faith or in our city. That's where true strength comes from, is being able to build on our faith. That's when we practice what we're hearing, rather than, and this is always the danger in social media or anything else. If I feel this way, if I've heard somebody and I think now the more stringent, the more judgmental is how I will go sometimes when people have these hard views, then the only thing I'm going to listen to, I'm going to search out online and everywhere else, those people that reinforce those views. When you're not challenged by any other view, when you're not challenged by a sermon or even in prayer when something gets brought up, if you're not challenged by something else so that you have to consider a different perspective, then you're not growing. That's when we're receding in ourselves and and that's when all of a sudden we're building walls where we should be building bridges. And so that's why I'm so grateful for being able to have this conversation and helping people understand that.
I'm curious, and I don't know if you know off the top of your head, I figure you might, but do you know how many faiths or denominations, religious orders are in Greater New Bedford? How many? I mean, there's 3 right here. How many more are there?
I couldn't give you that answer, and maybe somebody else might. I do know that there are some that there are some Buddhists. There are different faiths other than the quote unquote big 3 or 4. Obviously the Catholic Church is the predominant one in our area, but even they have had a drop in attendance. That's why you have a combining. You've had a lot of different, and again, it's a lot of different views. You got churches that are Christian churches, is defined as followers of Christ or believers in Christ, but you have some that are extremely conservative in their faith and their understanding of the Word. Some would say fundamental, and you have others who are more liberal in their faith and more broad in their understanding of things. So even within denominations and faiths, right, you have a very broad spectrum.
But I just want to emphasize too to the folks that there's so much. There's just, it's not just the 3 here. There's differences.
Oh, definitely.
Just locally here in New Bedford or Greater New Bedford.
Absolutely.
Martin, I'm curious from your background, because obviously you worked with the UN.
Yep.
Your perspective is unique in that you've seen incidents happen. So how do you talk to people about this? From your experience too, because it's unique that other people don't have.
Well, we see this very much as any harm to individuals, innocent civilians, is a human rights violation. You just have to recognize it as a violation. You're killing innocents or harming innocents. You're taking hostages. You're killing civilians by remote explosives, bombs, if you wish. These are all against the UN Charter and against the basic human rights concept. Everybody has a right to shelter and to access to food and water. We can add to that electricity and fuel to be able to run electricity and hospital supplies, though it's not encoded in exactly those words. There's a right to education and to freedom of movement and to freedom of expression. And that should be applicable to people in the state of Israel as well as the people who are in Palestine. At the moment, I don't think there's going to be an easy way to reconcile this at the moment. But I do see some hope in how it could be addressed, if you allow me to expand on that. I was a senior administrator in peacekeeping operations, and I was also in the political efforts to try and come to sort of resolution in some of the conflicts in peacekeeping. And at this point, and maybe it's a pipe dream, because maybe, and I'm the first one to say it, and everyone will say I'm absolutely nuts, but the only way I see it is that if there's a neutral force monitoring what's going on, let's say particularly in Gaza, but also in Palestine. And we have UN forces there now, but they're highly restricted. And they're not given much authority into really enforcing what they should be doing. They should be enforcing that Hamas has no weapons. They should be sure that however these weapons get into Gaza, cannot happen. So there are no attacks across the border. But they should also ensure that the people of Gaza and Palestine have access to trade, food, water, hospital supplies, electricity without any impediment. So the only way to do that would be with a neutral force. And I would argue that which would disarm Hamas, actually take out those things, and then assure that the integrity of the border, so that there's no infiltration either way, but allow the people of Gaza to build a society similar to Singapore or Monaco, small state that has free trade and recognized dignity of their human person. But that would need the vote of the Security Council, which would mean that they would establish a neutral force, probably from Muslim countries, primarily, in other words, from Morocco or from Pakistan, but with the authority to say, okay, look, we're here to make sure that peace is established. I think it would be very difficult for Israeli defense forces to try and reestablish safety and security, because there'll always be pushback. There'll be constant anger and frustration and hatred, and they won't be successful. And even with that's their goal, to try and reestablish security in Gaza, it won't happen, as I see it. And so the only way is if that would be given, a peacekeeping force would be given enough authority to be able to maintain absolute neutrality, but free access to trade and the basic human needs that the Gazans need. Same thing for the West Bank, and I would argue, as the rabbi has just said, that if we're going to have a small portion of the West Bank remain as an independent state, the settlers who have gone in there really should withdraw and allow the West Bank to operate itself as a sovereign country and not have incursions of any kind. and be respected for its own entity, and they should then, in turn, respect the status quo of the borders of Israel. The Israelis have sometimes said, I've read in the news, that they say, well, they're overcrowded in the boundaries of Israel, they need to expand. But there are countries that are much more densely populated than Israel and could easily absorb the need for more settlements within their present boundaries. So if they withdraw those settlements, it would be a great addition. And that, again, would have to be monitored probably by a neutral force, I would argue, a UN peacekeeping force.
You've been shaking your head. I'll let you...
There's nothing I can take issue with what Martin said. I think he's right. The problem, the pipe dream aspect of it, though I can be as sympathetic as I can, I wish we were able to impose those kinds of conditions into the situation. But I will go back to what I said before. Extremists are always going to seek to undermine exactly that kind of solution, right, because they are committed, and I would submit, extremists always are the ones who will sacrifice their lives to undermine any kind of plan. And that is their potency, and that is why it is I hate to say it, moderate people and moderate religious leaders don't like to use the word going to war again. You have to be able to go to war against the extremist elements in your midst. And that is a very tall order and a huge challenge. And I am sure there will be people who will take issue with this, but I do believe in my heart of hearts that's where the crux of the solution also lies.
I feel that we have extremists here in the United States as well. So this is the problem.
That's what Dave was talking about.
And so, we don't want to go to war against our extremists. We need to educate. And this is why I'm grateful to Pastor Dave for actually bringing us together so that we can have some dialogue, some education on what it is. So, because we can't eradicate except by knowledge and wisdom. In fact, democracy dies in ignorance. So.
We've moved along. I want to give you all a couple, 2 minutes or so to sort of wrap up what just the conversation and what you hope for down the road here. We'll start with Reverend Dave, actually.
All right. Well, again, we want to thank you, Jim, for this opportunity, and I want to thank both the Rabbi and Martin because this has not been an easy time. There's been many people that have called to, we've got to come together, we got to do this, we got to stop what's happening in Gaza. We got to stop what's happening, and people are coming with different views. And we said, slow down. We have to have an understanding amongst ourselves first. We can't be going in saying one thing or another. We all come from different perspectives. As Martin said in the beginning, we all call Abraham our father, and in true sense, all of the major faiths do descend from Abraham. We all believe that and claim that, but we do have different perspectives. We do have different streams of understanding, and so sometimes we have to come to understand what somebody else understands, what they believe. From my pulpit, I'm going to preach Christ. That's who I am. And I can't do other than that. But when I'm with my friends here, if that's how I'm starting my conversations every time, if I'm telling them they're wrong because of what they believe, because this is what I believe, then we've already, again, built that wall instead of a bridge. I need to understand who they are. I need to understand what they believe. And this is the community that we live in. No matter what Dave Lima says, it's not going to affect what's happening in the Middle East.
Right.
But what David Lima says here is going to affect the people around David Lima, and possibly even more so. And if I break relations because of a political thought or difference, then all of a sudden we're the poor here, and that's what I seek to always make sure doesn't happen. We need to work together in all things and to help people.
Martin?
Exactly that. Thank you, Pastor Dave, and thank you, Jim, for having us, and Rabbi for being with us. we need to be a community, and we are a community here in New Bedford. We have supported each other, as I mentioned earlier on, in many other trials and tribulations. It's a painful moment because we are seeing so many innocent people being affected by these conflicts. And there are conflicts all around the world, but so the more we understand each other and support each other, perhaps the less likelihood that we'd have some kind of conflict even within our own community. God forbid that someone here thinks that they have the answer and they want to harm any one of us. This is the importance of our being together, to show that we cannot have anti-Semitism, we can't have Islamophobia, we can't be against the Christian church or radical points of view in any way. Because we do live together. And for anyone to harm each other is against our basic principles. It's all of our religions say we cannot harm each other. So I pray that we can have influence on our elected leaders and those around the world who would see that they should show restraint and not harm the innocent, and just restrict the conflict as much as possible.
Rabbi?
So I would just say that, just a couple of things. We'll go back to the basics. I believe in the right of a sovereign Jewish state in the land of Israel. Yeah. At the same time, I'm able to maintain the same idea that the Palestinians have a right to self-determination and a state for themselves. And those two things are not mutually exclusive, and ultimately a solution has to come hopefully out of this. But at the same time, the state has to be allowed to defend itself under the attack that happened. With that, I don't want to I don't want to end my remarks on a low note. So I'll go back to Martin's point about peace and just say there's a quotation from our liturgy. Oseh shalom b'romav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'yamru amen. May the one who creates peace in the universe create peace to the people Israel and all people of the world. And I say amen.
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 And that's, I want to thank you all for coming in. I think it was a very good open dialogue, and I appreciate you all taking the time today to do the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of A Conversation with him. Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.